Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're officially off. And while we're going over the bridge in front of me, what I'd like all of you to do is take a look out your windows and down below. And what you're looking at is the ice-cold, crystal clear Ammonoosuc River. Look how clear this water is. And that's because it's naturally filtered. We have a lot of naturally filtered rivers and streams up here in the White Mountains. And this particular river begins on top of the ravine off the right front side of my coach, and that's called the Ammonoosuc Ravine. And up on top of that ravine are the highest lakes in the eastern United States, and they're called Lakes of the Clouds. That's where this river originates. And comes flowing out of Lakes of the Clouds down the Ammonoosuc Ravine hiking trail, which I'll point out to you up above. And then over to our base, and on to Littleton, New Hampshire. And then over to Vermont, and into the Connecticut River. And it flows down to the Connecticut River all the way to Long Island Sound.
That water goes all the way from here to all the way to
Engineer Tom back there, he's just blown the horn to let us know he's now got the pedal to the metal. And we're traveling at our top speed of, anybody know? About 5 miles per hour. So hold on to those hats and masks, whatever you do. Now while we're making our way up the mountain here, there's not a whole lot to see at this particular point. But this whole area is very rich in history, and I'm going to share some of that with you on the way up. We go back about 500 or 600 years ago. There was really nothing here but sheer wilderness. No railway, no roads, no hotels. And the only people here were the original inhabitants of this land. And that was the Abenaki Indians. And they would look up at the summit of Mount Washington on a sunny afternoon. And they called it their Great White Spirit. They actually worshiped the summit. And they believed that anyone who dared to enter the territory of the Great White Spirit would be swept up and killed. Now, little did they know, but it wasn't the Great White Spirit knocking everybody off. It was the yet-to-be-discovered world's worst weather up on the summit of Mount Washington. So things began to take off up here in the late 1700s with the arrival of the Crawford family, who settled about 7 miles down the road near Crawford Notch. And they were the real pioneers of North Country. Hey look, there's a moose! Everybody wants to see a moose when you come up here, and that's the best I can do. But if you're driving around tonight, please be very careful. They come out at night when it's dark, and we have an abundance of those little guys, and very dangerous. You don't want to hit one with your car. Route 302 is nicknamed Moose Alley. They're all over the place at night. So anyway, let's get back to the Crawfords. They settled here, and they were really road builders and inn builders, innkeepers. and also farmers, and they built the first roads to connect Maine and Vermont, which opened up trade and commerce. And the more roads they built, the more trade and commerce opened up, and pretty soon tourism followed. So then they started building all these inns. It was a big family, a lot of brothers and sisters, and they were all in the inn business. So they started building the inns for the overnight tourists. And there were several inns along Route 302 out there in the day. And that continued into the next generation of the Crawfords. Again, there were even more brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts and cousins. And again, they all were in the inn business. And one of the sons, Ethan Allen Crawford, he cut the first hiking trail in North America in 1819 from Crawford Notch up to the summit. And then in 1821, he came over to this side of the mountain, and he cut the second trail called the Mount Washington Path, which our railway is pretty much following today. And later, both of these paths were further developed into bridle trails, so now people could ride horseback up to the summit, which opened up access. And then you had the birth of the Appalachian Mountain Club, which cut a whole network of trails up here, and now folks had a roadmap to navigate their way around the White Mountains without getting lost. So that really fueled tourism, and it also made hiking a very popular sport. Now people could get, not only come up here, but get out in the woods and enjoy the outdoors. And that continued until all the inns were overloaded. So that kicked off the era of the Grand Hotels. And anybody familiar with the Mount Washington Hotel, for example? Well, there were, I believe, 34 Grand Hotels up here at the time, on both sides of the mountain, just like the Mount Washington. And then you had the automobile, which made people even more mobile and increased tourism. And it increases to this day. The White Mountains are a very, very popular tourist destination. And in about 4 to 6 weeks, we'll have millions of people up here enjoying our wonderful, beautiful foliage. So that's kind of a quick story of how tourism became popular up here. And let's talk about the railway here. The person who founded the railway, his name was Sylvester Marsh. And he grew up on his parents' farm down in Campton, New Hampshire, about 60 miles south. He became very proficient around mechanical equipment, and so much that they sent him off to the university in Boston, and after he graduated, he went to work for the meat packing and provisioning industry, which was operating out of Quincy Market at the time. Who's familiar with Boston and Quincy Market? Well, that's where Sylvester kind of started his career and established himself as a young up-and-coming businessman, entrepreneur, inventor, and he was doing pretty well financially. But we're talking about the era of the gold rush in America, and like a lot of other young people, Sylvester wanted to head west and seek a much larger fortune. So he packed his bags and off he went, and he got as far as Chicago, and the entrepreneur in him looked around and said, "I'm settling here," because number one, Chicago was the fastest growing city in America. Number two, the meat packing industry was really in its infancy, as people were just starting to move west, so he thought he could leverage off of all the great experience he gained back east and make some money. And number three, he had this family called the Vanderbilts out there, dumping millions of dollars into railroad infrastructure investments to connect a good portion of the country. So Sylvester settled in Chicago, joined the meatpacking industry, where it was the fastest growing market in the country, and he also partnered up with the railroad so he could distribute his product to a much larger geographical base. Well, long story short, after about 20-25 years, Sylvester made a huge fortune, millions and millions and millions of dollars in the Chicago meat packing industry. He essentially established what we still know today as the modern day industry model for that industry. And he also had a couple dozen inventions, so he did very well, and Well, the clock to about 1850, Sylvester decides to come back east with all his millions and retire. And that didn't work out so well. First of all, he got very bored and started looking for his next career. Then he also got sick with a condition called dyspepsia, which is a severe heartburn, and his doctor told him no more fatty, greasy meat, get some exercise, go on a diet, lose some weight, take some walks, maybe some long walks. Well, with that advice, Sylvester and his pastor came up here one day to hike to the summit of Mount Washington. Now, they started out on a nice day, and they got about 3/4 of the way up the summit, and they ran into the most horrific storm you can imagine, with hurricane winds, snow, sleet, hail, rain, fog. The mountain threw everything it had at them. And then they got lost, and they almost died, but Sylvester wasn't a quitter. And he and his pastor somehow made it up to the summit and fumbled into a building called the Tip Top House, which was up there at the time, and got out of the elements and survived the night.
Railroad train is coming home.
Oh yeah, that's what we're gonna get now.
We're going to take the yellow train down.
I don't know what.
By the way, the Tip Top House was built in 1853 as the first hostel for folks who made it up to the summit and wanted to spend the night there. And it's still up here today. It's a very historic building, and you'll have a chance to see it up at the summit.
This is his home.
Is he the water tower? Yeah. That's gonna be trash.
When are we at the top?
Is it? Yeah. It takes a little bit of time, yeah. It's a huge mountain.
The next morning, Sylvester came out of the Tip Top House, and it was a crystal clear day. He could see for 100 miles in every direction. And that's when he had his next revelation, that more folks should have the opportunity to come up and enjoy the summit. Although with a different approach, not by hiking and risking their lives, as Sylvester and his pastor did. So that became his passion and ultimately his next career. And he also developed a fascination with the railroads, who made him very wealthy in Chicago. So he set out to invent the world's first mountain climbing steam engine. So he brought up half of the mountain here, the Mount Washington path, and the right-of-way to pursue his dream. Now, coming up on the left is our infamous water tank. Please keep everything inside the windows. You'll see why. And as we're passing, take a look at this water tank because it's perfectly level. We're crooked. Seriously, we're crooked due to the steep grades we're traveling. Thanks, everybody. We made it safely. Give yourself a big hand. Yay! All right. So anyway, a conventional locomotive, in case you're wondering, can't deal with the grades and the terrain up here. If we put one of those on our tracks, it would just slide down to our base. So he needed a totally different design concept. And he tried for about 10 years to figure out a way to build a steam engine that could climb up these steep grades. And one day his breakthrough came when he borrowed an idea from a bicycle, namely the chain and sprocket. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about how our railway operates and why we're unique. If you look out at the center of our tracks here, you'll see something that resembles a chain, and we call that a rack. It's fixed to the center of our tracks, and underneath our engine and coach are the cogs, which look like very large gears. And the cogs ride in the rack and take us up and down the mountain. Basically, we're talking about rack and pinion technology here. Take a look out the right side of your coach. Up there is the top of the Ammonoosuc Ravine. And the building you see is one of about a dozen Appalachian Mountain Club hiking huts scattered around the White Mountains. So anyway, underneath, so the cogs do all the work. And that's what makes our railway unique. All the work's done in the center of our tracks. And our engine has 4 cogs. 2 drive cogs, which are engaged right now, pushing us up the mountain, and 2 braking cogs, which will be engaged on the way down, kind of holding us back from rolling down the mountain. So that's what makes our railway unique. A conventional railway doesn't have a rack and cogs. All the work's done on the rails. So Sylvester thinks he's on to something. He runs down to Concord, to our capital, and applies for a charter to build this railway. And he's met with all kinds of laughter and ridicule. Who in the world would want to build a steam engine or a railway up to the summit of Mount Washington? What a ridiculous idea, and it's impossible anyway. But after a lot of laughter and ridicule, they granted him his charter, but again, they thought he was a lunatic. And on that day, they said, good luck, Sylvester. We know you'll probably never finish this project, so we're also giving you verbal permission today to build a second railway to the moon. And that's where we get our nickname Railway to the Moon from. But Sylvester, the entrepreneur, he can't be bothered with politics. He comes back and starts building the tracks here and making some good progress. And bam, his project is put on hold due to the Civil War and lack of manpower. But he held on to his dream for a few years, and when all of that passed in 1866, Sylvester founded the Mount Washington Railway Company. That's the significance of the date on the side of your benches. And we all still work for that same company. And anyway, 3 short years later, he built this whole railway. And on July 3rd, 1869, Sylvester took his first coach of paying passengers safely up to the summit. Now I want you to think about that for a minute. We've been doing this for 150 years. 150 years, taking millions and millions of passengers